The morning Harrison Cole called me, I was standing at the bathroom sink trying to remember which side of the medicine cabinet had been mine. 43 years of marriage, and I had never once thought about it. The left side was his. The right side was mine. It was simply true. The way breathing is simply true. Until the morning, it isn't. And then you stand at a mirror staring at a shelf full of things that belong to a man who will not be coming back to use them. And you understand, for the first time, that the ordinary is the most devastating thing loss takes from you. Not the grand moments, the ordinary ones. My name is Elizabeth S. Holloway. I am 72 years old. I was 3 months into widowhood when Harrison Cole called my house and set something in motion that would take everything I thought I understood about my husband's death and turn it completely over. His voice came through warm and measured. The kind of practiced warmth that certain powerful men apply the way they apply cologne, automatically, without thinking, because it has worked for so long it has become reflex. "Elizabeth," he said. "Not Mrs. Holloway. Elizabeth, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I've been thinking about you since the service." I thanked him. That is what grief trains you to do. Accept what presents itself as kindness. He said he had been reviewing Raymond's personnel file. Routine administrative matters. Standard procedure after a workplace incident. He said he had come across something he believed I deserved to see in person. Before certain proceedings began, before things became complicated. Then he paused. And he said, "Come alone, Elizabeth. Don't bring your son. Marcus has always had a hot head, and I don't want this turning into something it doesn't need to be." I should have heard what was hiding inside those words. Grief makes ordinary things harder to hear clearly. I said yes. Raymond Holloway had been a senior site engineer at Cole Development Group for 21 years. 21 years of coming home with dust on his boots, and the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who builds things with his hands and knows they were built correctly. 21 years of early mornings and late evenings, and the specific pride of watching a structure rise from ground level and understanding that his decisions were inside it permanently. He died on a Tuesday in February when a section of scaffolding on the Riverside Municipal Project collapsed during a morning inspection. He was the only person in the fall zone. He was pronounced dead at the scene. I was told it was an accident. I was told the structure had passed its most recent inspection. I was told that Cole Development Group was deeply sorry and that Harrison Cole himself would ensure our family was taken care of. I believed all of it. That was my first mistake. After the call from Harrison Cole, I walked down the hall to my son Marcus's room. He was at his desk, working. He turned when I entered and looked at my face with the particular attention of someone who has learned to read their mother's expression before she speaks. I told him everything. The call, the personnel file, the meeting, the instruction to come alone, the comment about his temper. Something moved through Marcus's face that was not anger. It was recognition. The expression of someone who has just been confirmed in a suspicion they did not want confirmed. He said, "You're still going?" I said yes. He nodded once. Then he said quietly, "Pay attention to everything. What he touches, what he shows you, what he keeps on his side of the desk, and what he doesn't show you." I asked him what he meant. He shook his head slightly. "Just pay attention, Mom." I carried those words with me anyway, without fully understanding them. An hour later, I was driving toward Harrison Cole's office in Midtown, believing I was heading toward answers. I had no idea I was driving toward a lie, already fully assembled and waiting for me. His office smelled like leather and expensive wood, and something underneath both that I could not name until I was already sitting across from his desk. Harrison Cole stood when I was shown in. He came around the desk to take my hand in both of his, the same warmth he had performed at Raymond's memorial service, then gestured to the chair across from him with the ease of a man entirely comfortable with the architecture of the space he occupied. The desk between us was immaculate. 2 folders, left side, right side, nothing else. He sat slowly, folded his hands, said he was glad I had come, said there were things he felt I deserved to know before certain proceedings began moving forward. Then he opened the folder on the left. He turned it toward me. The photograph inside made my breath stop before I could stop it. Raymond sitting in a restaurant booth I had never seen. across from a woman I had never met, documents spread between them on the table. Her face partly turned away from the camera. His wasn't. They were leaning toward each other in the particular way that photographs can imply whatever the person showing them wants implied. And Harrison Cole absolutely wanted something implied. I felt it move through me. That cold, involuntary shock of seeing your dead husband frozen in a moment you cannot explain. Not belief, not accusation, just the physical response of surprise before reason catches up. 3 seconds. That was all he got from me. Because I had spent 43 years learning Raymond Holloway's face. The set of his jaw when he was concentrating. The particular angle of his body when he was explaining something he cared about. The way he leaned toward a conversation, not a person. The way a man leans when he is engaged with an idea rather than drawn to someone beside him. I knew that lean. I had watched it across 43 years of kitchen tables and dinner parties and the long Sunday mornings when he would talk through a problem at work while I listened and the coffee went cold between us. That was not what Harrison Cole was suggesting. That was Raymond at work. I looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then I looked at Harrison Cole. He was watching my face with the careful attention of a man reading an investment. Then he opened the second folder. Disciplinary records, complaints, a performance review that described Raymond as emotionally unstable, increasingly resistant to safety directives, difficult to manage in his final year of employment. A memorandum referencing possible unauthorized communication between Raymond and outside regulatory personnel connected to the municipal contract oversight process. Not formal charges. Not direct accusations. Just enough language assembled carefully enough to stain a dead man's reputation without fully committing to the words that would make it a provable lie. A suggestion instead of a statement. A shadow instead of a charge. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Every word was false. I knew it with the same certainty I knew Raymond's voice and his hands and the sound of his key in the front door when he came home in the evenings. But certainty and proof are not the same thing. And Harrison Cole knew that. He leaned forward slightly, said the workers' compensation review might become more complicated if questions about Raymond's conduct continued circulating internally, said he was willing to help however he could, personally. Then his hand moved slowly across the desk toward mine. Not aggressive, worse than aggressive, gentle. The practiced gentleness of a man performing care for a widow he was simultaneously cornering. I looked at his hand. Then I looked at him. Something shifted inside me in that moment that I felt as a physical thing. Not anger, not fear, not even grief. Clarity. I picked up my bag. I stood. He started to say my name again, but I turned before he finished it. I walked past his assistant, through the polished lobby, out into the February morning where the air was cold and clean and nothing like the room I just left. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel. I had left the photograph on his desk untouched, had not picked it up, had not asked for it, had not given him the satisfaction of watching me carry it out. 3 seconds. That was all Harrison Cole got from me. And underneath the grief and the humiliation and the shock already hardening into something else, something inside me had begun to move. Marcus was in the living room when I got home, sitting in the chair by the window, back straight, hands loose in his lap, waiting without looking like he was waiting. He looked at my face and did not ask if I was all right. I sat on the couch and told him everything. The photograph, the folders, the fabricated disciplinary record, the hand across the desk, the soft implication that the compensation claim could become complicated. Marcus listened without moving. He has always carried emotion quietly, even as a boy. But mothers know the difference between silence and restraint. What I saw on his face while I spoke was not confusion or shock. It was confirmation. The expression of a man who had already suspected something and was now watching it confirmed precisely as he had feared. When I finished, he said, "He's trying to discredit Dad before the compensation claim is finalized." "Yes," I said, "that's what I understood." "And the photograph is not what he wants it to look like." Marcus nodded once. Then he said something that stopped me. "Mom, who was Raymond meeting with in the last year before he died?" I thought about it. The late evenings, the silences at dinner, the particular distraction of a man who was carrying something he had not yet decided whether to share. I had put it down to the pressure of the project, to the scale of what Riverside Municipal represented, to the natural weight of the kind of work Raymond did. "I don't know," I said honestly. Marcus looked at his hands. Then he said, "I think we need to find out." 2 weeks after my visit to Harrison Cole's office, a woman appeared at my front door. She said her name was Patricia, and that she was Harrison Cole's personal coordinator. She had grocery store flowers in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. She said the office had wanted to show their support. She said Mr. Cole sent his regards. I was raised a certain way. You do not stand in your doorway treating kindness like a threat. So I let her in. I made tea. I sat across from her in my living room, and I listened to her ask careful questions about the estate paperwork, the insurance, the funeral billing, who was staying in the house, whether family was nearby. Every question sounded gentle. Every question was about paperwork, assets, and access. Then she asked to use the bathroom. "Upstairs," I told her. "First door on the left." The kettle was heating and my phone rang. My sister calling about arrangements for a family visit. And I was in the kitchen, managing both, when I realized how long Patricia had been upstairs. Not alarm long, just noticeable. She came back down wearing the same careful smile. She stayed another 10 minutes and left with gracious warmth, walking down the front path to her car with the efficient movements of someone already thinking about the next thing. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. Not once in the entire visit had she asked how I was doing, not whether I was sleeping, not whether I was eating, not how a woman survives 3 months without the man she built her entire life beside. She had asked what I had. She had never asked how I was. And standing in my doorway, I understood, with the cold clarity of something finally visible, that those were two entirely different kinds of visit. I called Marcus before I closed the door. The letter from the State Workers' Compensation Board arrived on a Thursday. Plain white envelope. State seal in the upper left corner. My name typed across the front with the cold precision of administrative processing. I opened it at the kitchen counter. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Raymond's employment classification had been reviewed and adjusted following documentation submitted by Cole Development's insurance representatives and legal counsel. The new compensation amount was at the bottom of the second page. I stared at that number for a long time. It was not simply smaller. It was the kind of smaller that reaches into every future decision before you have had time to finish grieving the present one. The kind of reduction that changes what is possible for the rest of the life. I called Marcus. He was at my kitchen table within 40 minutes, reading the letter standing at first and then slowly lowering himself into the chair the way a person sits when the weight of something requires physical accommodation. He read it twice. When he looked up, his voice was calm and level. "This didn't happen by accident," he said. "Not an accusation, a conclusion. The quiet certainty of a man who has arrived somewhere he had been moving toward for weeks without allowing himself to arrive there yet." I asked him what he meant. He set the letter down very carefully, aligning the corners the way Raymond used to do when he was thinking through something difficult. I watched my son touch paper, the way his father touched paper. And something broke open in my chest that I had been keeping carefully closed since February. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in the bed Raymond and I had shared for 43 years, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the notebook. There was a bag in the back of my closet, dark canvas, pushed behind the winter coats. I had put it there the night they returned Raymond's belongings from the site. A man from HR handing me a box and a bag at the front door with his eyes pointed somewhere over my shoulder, and me taking both, putting the box on the kitchen table, carrying the bag upstairs, and pushing it behind the coats because I couldn't look at it, and I didn't know where else to put it. 3 months. It had been sitting there for 3 months. I got up at 2 a.m. I walked to the closet. I reached behind the winter coats and pulled out the bag and carried it back to the bed and sat with it in my lap for a long time before I opened it. His work gloves were on top, his site badge, a folded rain poncho, travel aspirin with 2 tablets left, and underneath all of it, a notebook. Small, spiral bound. The cover bent at one corner the way notebooks get when they live in a bag for months. I opened it. Raymond's handwriting filled the pages. Columns of numbers, dates, sets of initials I didn't recognize, entries going back 14 months. I checked the first date and then the last and counted the distance between them. 14 months of something Raymond had been recording carefully and without my knowledge. I didn't understand the numbers. I didn't know the initials. But the handwriting, that particular slant he put on his sevens, the way he printed his capital letters like a man who learned penmanship from someone who took it seriously. That handwriting was so completely him that I stopped being able to see the page clearly. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since the morning they told me he was gone. Not the grief that comes in waves. The grief that comes from understanding that the person you lost was still in the middle of living when they left. That they were carrying something they had not yet finished carrying. That you will never know the end of what they were trying to do. When I could see again, I closed the notebook. I put it in my bag. I went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table and waited for Marcus to come home. He came through the door at 7:30 and found me exactly where I had been sitting for 2 hours. He looked at my face, then at my bag. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down without asking anything. I reached into the bag and placed the notebook on the table between us. He looked at it for a moment without touching it, as though he already understood what kind of thing it might be before he opened it. Then he picked it up. Marcus read slowly. His eyes moved carefully across the pages. He turned backward twice to compare earlier entries. He spent longer on the columns of numbers than on the notes beside them. Several minutes passed before he looked up. He asked where I found it. I told him, behind the winter coats. The bag I pushed there the night they returned, Raymond's belongings. He nodded, then asked whether anyone else had been in that closet since Raymond died. I started to say no. Then I remembered Patricia, the flowers, the tea, the trip upstairs, the kitchen phone call and the kettle and the length of the silence before I heard her footsteps again. I told him. Something in Marcus's expression settled. Not anger. Focus. He asked how long she had been upstairs. Long enough that I noticed, I said. He leaned back and looked at the notebook again. Then he closed it carefully. This isn't personal writing, he said. He opened it again and turned it toward me slightly. He explained slowly. Raymond had been comparing deliveries against project records, tracking what was supposed to arrive on site against what actually arrived. Materials billed to the project that the workers never saw. Inspection certifications applied to structures that had not been fully inspected. 14 months of Raymond quietly building a record of something he had discovered and was not yet sure who he could trust with. I stared at my son. How do you know how to read this? I asked. He rested his hand lightly against the open page. Because I've seen audit documentation built the same way before, he said. I sat with that. Marcus, I said, what exactly did you used to do? The kitchen clock moved through several seconds. Then he said quietly, part of my work used to involve reviewing procurement irregularities connected to public contracts. Used to. Not does. Used to. I asked if he was going to tell me the rest. He looked at the notebook one more time. Not yet, Mom. And something in the way he said it told me that answer wouldn't stay not yet forever. Marcus made calls I was not part of. He drove to places he did not describe in detail until afterward. He met with people whose names I did not know. What I understood gradually through the fragments he chose to share with me was this. Raymond had not simply noticed problems on the Riverside Municipal Project. He had been quietly documenting a pattern of procurement fraud tied to federal contract funding. Materials billed at one quality, delivered at another. Inspection certifications applied to work that had not been properly completed. A system of paper compliance concealing physical shortcuts that saved money at the top of the contractor chain and transferred risk down to the structure itself. Down to the scaffolding, down to the men working beneath it. Raymond had also, at some point in the 14 months before he died, made contact with someone outside the company, someone connected to regulatory oversight, someone he believed could help him put what he had documented into the right hands. The woman in the photograph. Not an affair. A meeting. Raymond sitting across from a compliance investigator, the documents he had assembled spread between them on a restaurant table, leaning toward the conversation, the way he always leaned toward things that mattered. Harrison Cole had used that photograph to suggest infidelity to a widow 3 months into grief. He had used Raymond's integrity as the instrument of the slander. I sat with that for a long time after Marcus explained it. Then I asked Marcus who had killed Raymond. He was quiet. "The scaffolding failed because of material substitution," he said carefully. "The inspection records were falsified. Whether Raymond's death was a result of general negligence or something more deliberate is what investigators are going to have to determine." "But you have a theory," I said. He looked at me steadily. "I have a theory that Raymond was getting close to something, and that certain people knew it." The kitchen was very quiet. "And Harrison Cole knew Raymond was documenting it," I said. "Yes," Marcus said. "I believe he did." Harrison Cole called me 2 weeks later. I was folding laundry. I let it ring twice. Then I answered with the voice I had been building without knowing I was building it. Steady, warm, giving nothing. He said he had become aware of the workers' compensation letter. Said the adjustment had been processed without his direct knowledge by the insurance carrier. Said he was personally looking into it on my behalf. Said Levon, he used Raymond's name wrong, corrected himself immediately. Said Raymond had meant a great deal to him, and by extension, so did I. His voice moved through the fabrication with the smoothness of a man who has constructed and delivered false comfort so many times the distinction between performance and sincerity has dissolved entirely. I said I appreciated him telling me. I said I was grateful for his attention. I kept my voice soft. My sentences short. I gave him nothing to hold on to. No anger, no suspicion, no crack he could work his fingers into. I was a grieving widow grateful for the kindness of a powerful man. I performed it without flinching. When we said goodbye, I set the phone down on the laundry pile and sat on the edge of the bed in the particular stillness that follows something that required everything you had. Then I called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. I said, "He called." Marcus said, "I know. You did exactly right, Mom." I held the phone after we hung up and sat with what I had just done. I had spoken warmly and believably to a man who had fabricated a slander about my husband's character, filed documents designed to take money from my family, reached across a desk toward me while my husband's body was still newly in the ground, and may have been complicit in the conditions that put Raymond there. And I had thanked him I was not the woman I had been 3 months ago. That woman would have shaken. This one didn't. Patricia did not return to my house. What happened instead, I learned later. Marcus told me in pieces as it became possible to tell. She had been asked to come back. Harrison Cole had called her and told her, not asked, told, in the flat expectation of a man who has never genuinely considered that the person he is speaking to might say no, to return to my home and find what she had missed. She had looked for the notebook on her first visit. She had gone past the bathroom, down the hall, into my bedroom, checked the closet shelf, found nothing. The bag behind the coats was lower than she had looked. When Harrison Cole told her to go back, she sat at her desk for a long time after hanging up. 9 years. 9 years of managing his calendar and handling his correspondence and doing things at the edges of her job description that she had never examined too closely because the salary was good and the position was respectable. And there is a particular way that comfort makes you agree to things you would not otherwise agree to. Slowly, incrementally. Each step small enough to feel survivable until you are standing so far from where you began that you cannot find the place where the direction changed. She did not go to my house. She drove to a coffee shop 2 neighborhoods from her apartment. She sat in the corner booth with a document she had copied years earlier. A contract modification from a coal development project, a small amendment, an additional subcontractor whose registration records she had quietly looked up once and then filed away with the particular instinct of a person who has learned to keep copies of things that leave a feeling. She found the number for the Office of Federal Contract Compliance. She called. She gave the contract number, the subcontractor name. She said she possessed a copy document tied to a municipal project currently under federal review. The person on the line became very still. Patricia sat in her parked car afterward for a long time, looking through the windshield. She did not feel heroic. She felt tired. The particular tiredness of someone who has spent years accumulating small compromises until those compromises became heavier than the truth they were covering. She never called me to tell me what she had done. She simply did it. And somewhere in the machinery of federal oversight, something began to move. The formal federal charges were filed on a Thursday in late autumn. Marcus called me at 8 in the morning. I was already at the kitchen table with my coffee. I knew from the quality of his voice before he said anything specific that it was the call we had been waiting for. Harrison Cole, 2 company executives. Federal contractor fraud, material substitution, falsification of inspection certifications, obstruction connected to a compliance inquiry. The Riverside Municipal Project records had been seized. Company accounts were under review. The site supervisor, who had been on indefinite leave since the collapse, had been located and had entered negotiations with federal prosecutors. The scaffolding collapse was formally reopened. I sat at the table and said very little. 6 weeks later, I received a second letter from the Workers' Compensation Board. The reclassification had been reversed following investigation findings. The original amount was restored along with interest accumulated during the dispute period. The language stayed dry and administrative all the way through. When I reached the final number at the bottom of the page, I sat there crying anyway. Not because it felt like winning, because it felt like correction, like someone finally admitting that the truth had existed the entire time, whether people chose to honor it or not. The last thing Marcus told me was the thing that mattered most. More than any indictment, more than any restored compensation, more than any courtroom proceeding that I would never attend and did not need to. He called on a Tuesday evening while I was doing something ordinary, washing a single coffee cup instead of 2, the same small daily grief that had started all of this months earlier. He said that during the federal document recovery, investigators had located a safety complaint Raymond had filed 8 months before he died. Raymond had formally reported inspection irregularities on the Riverside Municipal Project through proper internal channels. The complaint was correctly documented. It was submitted to the right department. It referenced specific materials discrepancies and specific certification question of the North Scaffolding section. It had been received, logged, and buried by the people responsible for acting on it. Raymond had done exactly what he was supposed to do. He had trusted the system, and the people above him had closed ranks and left him standing in the fall zone. I stood at the kitchen sink holding the phone, and I thought about Raymond sitting at his desk 14 months before he died, starting the first page of that notebook, recording dates, recording numbers, building column by column, the kind of documentation that an honest man builds when he discovers something wrong and is trying to find the right way to say it. He never stopped trying to do the right thing, even when the right thing made him a target, even when nobody with the power to protect him chose to use it. I thought about the morning of the collapse, Raymond leaving the house before dawn, his coffee mug rinsed and left upside down on the drying rack, the way he always left it when he came home after me in the evenings and didn't want to leave dishes in the sink. He had rinsed his mug. He had thought about coming home. He was still in the middle of everything when they took him. I went to his grave on a Friday morning in December. The cemetery was quiet the way it is on weekday mornings. Not peaceful exactly, just still. I came without flowers because Raymond always said flowers were for living rooms and porches, not grave sites. So I came empty-handed and stood with my hands at my sides and talked to him the way people talk when grief has finally stopped caring whether conversations make sense. I told him I found the notebook. I told him I understood now why those last 14 months had felt different. The distraction at dinner, the late evenings, the silences that I had interpreted as work pressure, and that had actually been the weight of a man who had discovered something serious and was trying to decide what to do about it. I told him I understood he had been afraid, not for himself. Raymond was not a man who was afraid for himself. He was afraid for the workers on his site, for the people who would stand beneath that scaffolding, for the families who would receive the call the way I had received the call. He saw it coming. He did everything right, and it still came. I told him I was sorry for the 3 seconds in Harrison Cole's office when doubt moved through me at all. 3 seconds of involuntary shock at a photograph taken out of context and deliberately misrepresented to a widow. 3 seconds was all he got, because I knew Raymond's hands and his voice and the angle of his body in a conversation that mattered. I knew the difference between the lean of a man drawn to someone and the lean of a man engaged with an idea. I had spent 43 years learning that difference. I told him what Marcus had done. The calls, the meetings, the notebook, the federal filing. I told him about Patricia. I told him about the compensation letter and the number that was finally correct. I told him his safety complaint had been found. I stood there until the words ran out. The sky above the cemetery was pale and undecided, the kind of sky that hasn't chosen yet. I stood in it for a long time before finally turning toward the car. That evening, Marcus came home for dinner. We ate at the kitchen table. We talked about ordinary things, his drive up, the weather changing, a book I had been reading for weeks in fragments, the way reading happens when your mind is still learning to focus. After dinner, we sat in the living room, Marcus in the chair by the window where Raymond used to sit. Me on the couch across from him, the lamp on, the neighborhood quiet outside. I reached into my bag and took out the notebook. I held it for a moment. Then I set it on the coffee table between us. We both looked at it. Marcus said, "He was building something." "Yes," I said, "he was. He didn't get to finish it." "No, but other people did." Marcus looked at his father's handwriting on the open page. "He would have handled it differently," he said quietly. "Waited longer, trusted the right channels." "He did trust the right channels," I said. "They just weren't good enough." Marcus nodded slowly. I closed the notebook. I held it against my chest, the way you hold something that belongs to someone you cannot hold anymore. "He saw all of it," I said. Marcus looked at me steadily. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "He did." Then, after a moment, quietly, "He always did. I am still in this house. I wake earlier now. The alarm I set after Raymond died, to give myself something to orient toward, a time that belonged to the present rather than the grief. I make coffee. 1 cup. I have stopped fighting that. The medicine cabinet is still organized the same way. His side and mine. I have not changed it. I don't think I will. Some things do not require changing. Some things are allowed to simply remain as evidence of what was true. Raymond Holloway was an honest man in a structure built by people who were not. He discovered what they were doing. He documented it correctly. He filed the right complaint through the right channels. He trusted that the systems designed to protect workers would protect the workers. He was wrong about that. But he was not wrong about anything else. Harrison Cole's trial is ongoing. The proceedings move the way legal proceedings move. Slowly, in pieces, with the particular patience of institutional accountability that is never as satisfying as the stories we tell about justice, but is more durable than anything else available. I do not attend the hearings. I do not need to watch Harrison Cole answer for what he did in order to know what he is. The truth settled that for me long before any courtroom. What I carry now is not bitterness, it is clarity. The clarity of a woman who loved a man for 43 years and discovered, in the months after she lost him, that she had never fully understood the size of what he was doing or the size of what it cost him. He was still in the middle of something when they took him. He was trying to save the people working below him on a structure he knew was wrong. He did not finish, but the people who came after him did. And somewhere in the particular faith that a man like Raymond operates from, the faith that honest documentation eventually finds its way to honest people, that the right complaint filed through the right channel eventually reaches someone who acts on it. Somewhere in that faith, I think he knew it would be finished. Maybe not by him, but by someone. It was finished by a federal investigator who followed a thread. It was finished by a woman who found a document in a safety deposit box and made a phone call she was afraid to make. It was finished by a son who sat in diners with old colleagues and asked careful questions in the particular language of people who have spent their careers inside systems, like the one that failed his father. It was finished by a 72-year-old woman who stood in a powerful man's office and gave him 3 seconds of involuntary shock and nothing else. 43 years of learning a man. 3 seconds. That was all he got. If this story gave you something, a language for a grief you are carrying, a clarity about a truth that has not yet been heard, please share it with someone who needs it. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Tell me what you are still carrying. Because the people who saw things clearly and tried to say them correctly deserve to be remembered as exactly what they were, not what the people who benefited from silencing them needed them to be. Raymond saw it. He always did.